We take it for granted that our world is blue and green. It is an ambient truth, baked into our psychology from the moment we are old enough to look up at the sky or down at a blade of grass. We live on a vibrant, sapphire marble wrapped in emerald forests, swirling white clouds, and vast, deep oceans. It is the definitive color palette of life as we know it, the visual signature of a living world. But if you could board a time machine and travel back billions of years, long before the dinosaurs, long before the first primitive plants crept onto dry land, back to an era when the planet was young, violent, and chaotic, you wouldn't recognize home. Look out the window of your descending vessel, and you wouldn't see a pale blue dot. You would see a violet one. Imagine a massive, churning, alien sphere of deep lavender, magenta, and royal purple floating in the dark void of space. The oceans aren't a refreshing azure, they are a thick, wine-dark expanse of amethyst. The continents, barren and devoid of trees, are coated in a strange, iridescent violet slime. This isn't a sci-fi premise designed for a cinematic universe, nor is it a psychedelic fantasy. It is a genuine, heavily debated, and deeply fascinating scientific hypothesis known to astrobiologists as the purple Earth theory. First proposed by molecular biologist Das Sarma, it suggests that the dominant color of life on our planet wasn't always green, and that for hundreds of millions of years, Earth was wrapped in a vibrant shade of violet. To understand how this is possible, and why the world eventually traded its royal purple robes for a coat of emerald green, we have to unravel a mystery buried deep within our own biology. We have to look at the physics of light radiating from our sun, the mechanics of microscopic life surviving in a hostile primordial soup, and a grand, multi-billion-year evolutionary war that changed the face of our world forever. The monopolist of light. To comprehend why the ancient Earth might have been purple, we first need to dissect the color of the modern one. Why, exactly, is the world green today? The answer, as we are taught in elementary school biology, is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the primary pigment used by modern plants, trees, multicellular algae, and cyanobacteria to perform oxygenic photosynthesis. This is the bedrock chemical process of the modern biosphere, using the energy of sunlight to split water and carbon dioxide, converting them into sugars to power growth, and releasing oxygen as a byproduct. But when you look closer at how chlorophyll actually works under a physics lens, something profoundly strange emerges. It reveals a bizarre biological paradox, one that hints at a hidden history. Sunlight looks white or yellowish to our eyes, but it is actually a composite spectrum containing all the colors of the rainbow, each vibrating at a different wavelength and carrying a different amount of energy. When sunlight hits a modern plant, the chlorophyll molecules inside its cells absorb specific wavelengths of light to power their internal chemical factories. Specifically, chlorophyll absorbs blue light and red light with incredible, razor-sharp efficiency. But there is a massive, gaping hole in its appetite. Chlorophyll does not absorb green light. Instead, it reflects it away, completely unutilized. That rejected, bounced light travels through the air and hits our retinas, which is why we perceive leaves, grass, and sweeping forests as green. Here lies the evolutionary mystery. If you look at the raw energy output of our sun, it doesn't peak in the red spectrum, nor does it peak in the blue. The sun emits its maximum amount of photons and its highest concentration of energy right in the middle of the visible spectrum, in the green wavelengths. From a standpoint of pure engineering and natural selection, this seems completely backward. If plants spent billions of years evolving to harvest energy from the sun, why would they choose a pigment that completely rejects the single most abundant, energy-rich wavelength of light available to them? Why would nature leave the absolute best source of solar energy entirely on the table? It is the equivalent of a solar power company inventing a state-of-the-art solar panel that reflects the exact frequency of light it receives the most from the local environment. For decades, evolutionary biologists found this paradox deeply perplexing. It seemed inefficient. It looked like a cosmic design flaw, a mistake that slipped through the cracks of natural selection. Unless, of course, chlorophyll wasn't the first to arrive at the feast. What if chlorophyll doesn't use green light because, by the time it evolved, the green light was already bought and paid for? The purple pioneer in the early 2000s, microbiologists looked into the deepest, most ancient branches of the tree of life to find an answer. They looked past plants, past animals, and even past standard bacteria, focusing instead on a domain of single-celled organisms called Archaea. Archaea are among the oldest living lineages on Earth. They are famous for being extremophiles, capable of thriving in environments that would instantly destroy modern life, boiling hydrothermal vents, hyperacidic springs, and suffocatingly salty lakes. And when scientists looked at certain ancient halophilic, salt-loving, Archaea, they discovered an alternative way of harvesting the sun. These microscopic pioneers don't use chlorophyll. They don't even possess the complex cellular machinery required for standard photosynthesis. Instead, they rely on a much simpler, highly elegant molecule called retinal. Retinal is a light-sensitive pigment that is chemically related to vitamin A. It is incredibly ancient, robust, and easy for a simple cell to manufacture. But unlike chlorophyll, retinal has an entirely different appetite for the solar spectrum. Retinal absorbs green light, the exact wavelength where the sun's energy peaks. Because it absorbs the high-energy green and yellow wavelengths, it reflects the remaining light at the edges of the spectrum back into the environment, the deep reds and the dark blues. When you mix red and blue light together, you get purple. If we were to look at the primordial oceans of Earth roughly 3 billion years ago, before the rise of complex plants, these retinal-using halobacteria and archaea would have been the undisputed rulers of the planet. Lacking any significant predators and fueled by the most abundant energy source on Earth, they would have multiplied in astronomical numbers. The oceans wouldn't look like the clear blue waters of the modern Pacific. They would have been a thick, viscous, churning broth of violet, lavender, and magenta. From space, the entire planet would have cast a deep, royal purple hue across the dark expanse of the solar system, a lone violet gemstone orbiting a young sun. This elegant reality solves the chlorophyll paradox. Imagine an ancient world where the surface of the primordial ocean is completely blanketed by a thick, suffocating layer of purple, retinal-using microbes. They are sitting at the top of the water column, absorbing all the premium, high-energy green light from the sun, thriving and dominating the global ecosystem. Down below, in the dimly lit depths of the ocean, newer, more fragile, and more complex bacterial organisms are trying to survive. They want to harvest sunlight too, but all the premium green light is being stolen by the purple monopoly floating above them. If these new, struggling organisms want to survive, they cannot use retinal, there is no green light left for them to catch. They are forced by the sheer pressure of survival to develop a completely different pigment, one that can catch whatever scraps of light manage to filter down through the dense purple canopy. So, out of pure evolutionary necessity, they developed chlorophyll. Chlorophyll was designed to catch the red and blue light that the retinal microbes didn't want and allowed to pass through. It was an adaptation born out of pure desperation, a biological workaround to survive in the deep, dark shadows of a global purple empire. The green organisms were the underdogs, living on the crumbs of a violet world. The great biological war for hundreds of millions of years, these two distinct forms of life coexisted in a stratified, uneasy balance. The purple retinal organisms basked in the warmth of the upper ocean, absorbing the sun's peak energy and painting the planet in shades of violet. Meanwhile, the green chlorophyll organisms scraped by in the depths, surviving on the solar leftovers, slowly refining their internal chemistry. But chlorophyll possessed a hidden, revolutionary advantage, a weapon of mass disruption that would completely alter the fate of the world and spell doom for the Purple Empire. Retinal-based energy generation is simple, but it is fundamentally limited. It acts essentially as a basic proton pump. When sunlight hits the retinal molecule, it changes shape, moving a proton across the cell membrane to create an electrical gradient that generates ATP, the basic currency of cellular energy. It is an efficient system, but it doesn't alter the chemistry of the world around it. It produces energy, but it doesn't create complex organic matter on a massive scale. Chlorophyll photosynthesis, however, is a chemical masterpiece. It is vastly more complex, involving a multi-stage process that allows organisms to do something revolutionary: split water molecules, H2O, apart to harvest hydrogen ions and electrons. By utilizing water, an almost infinite resource on Earth, chlorophyll-based organisms could produce vastly more energy and synthesize complex sugars far more effectively than their purple rivals. They were no longer constrained by the limitations of simple proton pumps. They had unlocked the ultimate biochemical engine. But this engine came with an environmental byproduct. As the green organisms split water molecules to harvest hydrogen, they looked at the remaining oxygen atoms as useless waste. They began to release a highly reactive, volatile, and toxic gas into the environment, free molecular oxygen, O2. To understand the horror of this event, we have to realize that the ancient Earth was an anaerobic world. The atmosphere was a suffocating mix of methane, carbon dioxide, and ammonia. To the life forms that ruled this world, including the dominant purple retinal microbes, oxygen wasn't the breath of life. It was a deadly, corrosive poison. Oxygen eagerly binds to organic molecules, tearing apart cellular walls, disrupting delicate metabolic pathways, and destroying proteins. It was, quite literally, environmental toxicity on a global scale. As the green organisms multiplied in the deep, their population exploded due to the sheer efficiency of their water-splitting technology. They began pumping more and more oxygen into the oceans. Initially, the planet managed to buffer this toxic output. The oceans were filled with dissolved iron, and the oxygen immediately bound to it, creating massive deposits of iron oxide, rust, that sank to the ocean floor, forming the banded iron formations we mine for steel today. But eventually, the planet's natural sinks were overwhelmed. The iron ran out. The oceans became saturated with oxygen, and the gas began to outgas into the atmosphere. This triggered what geologists call the Great Oxidation Event, or the oxygen catastrophe, roughly 2.4 billion years ago. It stands as perhaps the most devastating, sweeping mass extinction in the entire history of the planet. The rising tide of oxygen didn't just poison the purple microbes directly, it fundamentally broke the planet's climate control system. The oxygen reacted with the abundant atmospheric methane, a potent greenhouse gas, turning it into carbon dioxide and water. Methane holds heat in an atmosphere with incredible efficiency. Carbon dioxide is far less effective. By stripping the methane away, the green organisms accidentally turned off the planet's greenhouse blanket. The global temperature plummeted. Earth was plunged into a brutal, planet-wide ice age known as the Huronian glaciation. For nearly 300 million years, the entire globe was encased in a sheet of ice kilometers thick, turning the world into a featureless, frozen snowball Earth. The Purple Empire, unable to cope with the toxic oxygen, the loss of their warm surface waters, and the shifting global climate, collapsed completely. The vibrant violet oceans faded away as the retinal microbes were driven into near extinction. They were wiped out across the vast majority of the globe, forced to retreat to the most extreme, isolated, and oxygen-depleted environments on Earth. Deep underground caves, stagnant volcanic springs, and hypersaline lakes where oxygen couldn't easily dissolve. When the centuries of ice finally melted and the planet warmed, the green chlorophyll-using survivors emerged from the deep oceans victorious. They had survived their own ecological apocalypse. With their purple competitors decisively driven into the shadows, the green underdogs claimed the surface of the planet. They spread across the sunlit top layers of the oceans, crawled onto the barren continents, and evolved over eras into the trees, plants, grasses, and forests we see today. The Earth turned green not because green was the optimal choice from the absolute beginning of time, but because the green underdogs won a brutal, primordial war of attrition against a purple tyrant. Traces of the violet realm. The idea of a purple Earth might sound like an untestable hypothesis, a neat, poetic story cooked up by imaginative biologists to explain an odd quirk of solar physics and plant pigments. But as scientists look closer at the modern world, they keep finding the indelible fingerprints of this ancient violet realm hidden in plain sight. Consider our own bodies. The pigment retinal isn't just found in obscure microbes living in salt flats or volcanic springs. It is the exact same molecule that sits inside the back of your eyes right now, allowing you to interpret light. Human vision relies on a protein called rhodopsin, which is embedded in the rod cells of our retinas. At the core of rhodopsin is the exact same retinal molecule used by those ancient, primordial purple microbes billions of years ago. When light hits your eye, the retinal absorbs a photon, changes its physical shape, and triggers an electrical impulse that travels down the optic nerve to your brain, creating the phenomenon of sight. Why does our advanced, highly evolved mammalian vision rely on a primitive, ancient molecule like retinal instead of the highly efficient chlorophyll that surrounds us in every park, garden, and forest? Because our distant, single-celled ancestors evolved in an environment where retinal was everywhere. It was the standard, foundational tool for interacting with light. We carry a literal piece of the ancient purple ocean inside our very eyes, using the relic of a forgotten empire to view the green world that replaced it. Furthermore, astrobiologists are beginning to realize that the purple Earth theory isn't just a fascinating window into our planet's deep past, it might be a vital, revolutionary roadmap for finding life on distant, alien worlds. When astronomers use powerful space telescopes to peer across light years of empty space at exoplanets orbiting distant stars, they cannot see surface details. They cannot see alien trees, oceans, or cities. Instead, they look at the light reflected from these worlds, searching for biosignatures, chemical and visual clues embedded in the light spectrum that indicate the presence of a living biosphere. For a long time, the holy grail of astrobiology was the red edge. On Earth, modern vegetation absorbs red and blue light but strongly reflects infrared and near-infrared light to avoid overheating. This creates a distinct, sharp spike in the infrared spectrum of light reflected from Earth, a literal signal flare that says this planet is covered in plants. But the purple Earth theory reminds us that the red edge is a modern luxury. If alien astronomers had looked at Earth during its first 2 billion years of life, they wouldn't have seen a red edge. They would have seen a purple edge, a completely different spectral signature caused by a world dominated by retinal. This realization has fundamentally expanded the hunt for alien life. Many of the most promising exoplanets we discover today do not orbit stars like our Sun. Instead, they orbit M-dwarf stars, commonly known as red dwarfs. Red dwarfs are the most common stars in the universe, making up roughly 70% of all stars in the galaxy. They are much smaller, cooler, and dimmer than our Sun, and their light output is heavily skewed, emitting very little blue or ultraviolet light, with their energy peaking in the red and infrared spectrum. If life were to evolve on a planet orbiting a red dwarf star, standard green chlorophyll wouldn't be very useful. The biological underdogs of that world wouldn't look like our plants. Instead, retinal-based pigments, or other alternative pigments that absorb different parts of the dim stellar spectrum, would be far more effective. A distant, habitable planet covered in alien vegetation, microbial mats, or sprawling extraterrestrial oceans might look, through our telescopes, like a deep, swirling marble of violet, magenta, or dark burgundy. When we finally discover life on another planet, it may not look like the lush, green garden of Earth. It might look exactly like the ancient Earth we lost billions of years ago. The canvas of time, the realization that Earth was once purple, forces us to confront a profound, humbling truth about our planet. The world we see today is not static, nor is it an inevitable certainty. We live in a brief, fleeting snapshot of geological time. The blue oceans and green forests that feel so permanent, so ancient, and so fundamentally right to us are merely the current chapter in an unimaginably long, ever-shifting planetary epic. Earth is not a fixed stage, it is a canvas that has been continuously painted over by the forces of evolution and geology. It has been a world of blackened, molten rock, it has been a suffocating expanse of methane and toxic gas, it has been a frozen, featureless snowball locked in ice, and it has been a violent, violet expanse dominated by alien microbes. Today, it happens to be a garden of green and blue. If we could fast forward another billion years into the future, the color of our planet will undoubtedly change again. As our sun ages, it will inevitably grow hotter and brighter. The oceans will begin to boil and evaporate, atmospheric carbon dioxide will drop, and the green plants that rule the continents today will eventually find themselves unable to survive. They will fade away, suffocated by the changing environment, just like the purple microbes before them. And when they fall, new organisms, wielding pigments we have never imagined, will rise from the deep crust of the earth to claim the remaining light. The canvas will be painted over once more. But for now, we live in the age of the green. Whenever you look out at a field of fresh grass, walk through the quiet depths of a forest, or gaze up at the canopy of an ancient tree, look closer. Remember that you are not just looking at nature, you are looking at the ultimate victors of an ancient, planetary struggle for survival. You are looking at the descendants of the biological underdogs, the organisms that grew in the dark, weaponized toxic waste, survived a global ice age, and painted over a purple world.